リンクスタート
Yes, it's finally time for Sword Art Online Lost Recollection. This review is long overdue, but here it is. We are finally diving into it. And honestly, as it's been a while since I played a Sword Art Online game, I was really looking forward to it. Main reason why it took so long is that I have to be careful when playing these games. As an anime proved, you might fall down the stairs and wake up in the last game you played. So yeah, I just gotta spread my risk a little bit here and there, cause I do not want to wake up in a Sword Art Online game. Except it's Fatal Bullet, then I'm fine. On top of that, I decided to play another Sword Art Online game first, which was not the greatest success. To a degree, I can get over a heavy focus on monetization, lack of design or something like that, but I can't get over the fact that whenever I boot up a Sword Art Online game, there's a huge amount of potential wasted on purpose. I know it's more or less the staple of the series. I mean, after 6 games, we only had one game that managed to do more than just scratching the surface of Sword Art Online's potential. And after that, we never went back to that level, yet I still get my hopes up every single time, which is kinda weird and foolish. My hopes for Sword Art Online Lost Recollection were unusually high. The trailer showed and promised things that got me very excited, like exploring the Dark Territory, a land that the anime just skipped through, a direct continuation of the story and world of Alicization Lycoris, and the newest waifu for the Kirito gang, Dorothy, looked very promising. In other words, a lot of potential, a lot of hope, and a lot to be ruined. But who knows? These games have surprised me in the past a lot, so maybe it will do it again. Sword Art Online Lost Recollection starts right where Alicization Lycoris had left us. The human realm is in balance, but the final stress test is drawing near. If the Dark Territory would declare war and attack the Eastern Gate, and it would fall, it would mean disaster for the human realm. But an unexpected new path opens for the human realm, a path of peace. A messenger sent to the humans by one of the 10 Dark Lords arrives before the final stress test could begin, offering a chance for peace negotiations between the two realms and hopefully avoiding war. A small delegation is assembled and travels through the treacherous Dark Territory, facing the very difficult task to find peace between the two realms and facing all the unknown challenges that comes with that task. And who is going to lead the peace talk? Who is going to charge deep into enemy territory for the sake of the world? It's of course the Chad himself, the Black Swordsman, Kirito. Kirito and gang. Just like Alicization Lycoris, Lost Recollection continues the game's alternative storyline of Sword Art Online. The alterations the game's stories have are drastic, but keeps certain ideas, characters and plot points alive, but merely expands on them. And in my opinion, it usually takes a much more interesting approach to these things than the anime did. This is where most of the potential is created for the games, but also lost, as usually the setup and story has to make way for the style of writing we know from the anime. Most games that came before fell to this, and Lost Recollection is unfortunately no exception to this. And while this was to be expected, it was of course still very disappointing. We still get a chance to see aspects of the Dark Territory we didn't get before. Get a feel and idea of the people that live in it, and the overall state of the world sets a nice stage for the story, which uses that stage right at the start very nicely. Yet as we go along with the story, we can see it become fast a story where Kirito is just being Kirito, forcing the hero role on himself without proper reason, build-up or character development, creating very hollow results, mostly based on convenience. It is again a waste of potential, but beside that being very disappointing, it was also very frustrating this time around. Because the character that needed to be the hero of this story and had everything, be that build-up, reasoning and character development, to be one, was standing right next to Kirito. Dorothy is the newest waifu for the Kirito gang, and she is a very good new addition to the group. She is a Dark Knight from the Dark Territory, and her backstory heavily plays in on the main story, especially the way to find peace between the two realms. On top of that, her character felt quite realistic and to a degree relatable. Trying to fit in, fear of losing what you hold dear, and the risk of always putting the needs of others above yourself are interesting elements to discuss and involve with the larger story that is present here. As far as good characters in Sword Art Online exist, Dorothy is one of the very few of them. And that is saying something, considering the huge potential loss as Kirito's writing pushes her character and its development out of the spotlight constantly, and the very lackluster amount of interaction with characters we get outside of the main story. While Sword Art Online always manages to create interesting story premises and worlds, the games themselves for me are more about the characters themselves. Design-wise, Sword Art Online always manages to hit a certain design that either stands out or feels unique or interesting. And while their characters themselves are rather stereotypical in writing, interacting with them usually leads to fun, wholesome or interesting situations, giving them of course more of a sense of a character than just being a girl of the Kirito gang, even though it's just a little. Interactions with these characters is the element I enjoy a lot in these Sword Art Online games. Some of them focus so much on interactions that they border on part visual novel / dating sim than anything else, which was very nice. It's therefore unfortunate that interactions with characters here in Last Recollection is dialed back a lot to almost being removed completely from the game. Interaction events rarely are triggered by default and are heavily connected to the affinity system. You gain affinity by going on adventure with characters, do skills with them and complement them at certain moments during fights. Just like in the other games. However, here in Last Recollection, gaining any significant amount of affinity and thereby unlocking interaction events is a huge grind. It almost took me playing with the exact same party for the entire playthrough just to get one character to the max affinity level. In previous installments, you would gain affinity as well in the same way, but you could also take characters on dates to gain affinity, which was never a very good or special element, but it had its charm. That aspect is however removed here in Last Recollection, lowering the amount of interactions you will be having with these characters even further. Being unable to interact often with characters and have a very low rotation between characters in your party is just a shame, as there's a huge amount of characters present in this game. The character roster in Alicization Lycoris was already huge, and Last Recollection added even more characters on top of that. Characters from all the games are present here, and even anime exclusive ones. Which would have been great if it wasn't for the struggle to interact with most of them due to the removal of the dating mechanics and the insane grind that is the affinity system. Another aspect Last Recollection struggles with is who you play as and how Kirito is portrayed visually. In previous installments we also played as Kirito, which brought its fair share of issues, but usually there were some workarounds enabling you to somewhat play as your own character. This was mostly possible when the story was presented as a visual novel, where Kirito was a silent, invisible protagonist. Because cutscenes even in those games felt jarring at times as you saw your own character morph into default Kirito, but to a sense it was kept to a minimal as cutscenes were very rare. Last Recollection, however, decided to move away from telling its story in a visual novel, and instead went with in-game graphic storytelling, which I thought was a nice step forward. It gives this game a more JRPG feeling, which sells the game a lot better than a visual novel. but it also keeps you better at locations and in the world instead of seeing the same 10 backgrounds over and over again. But if you decide to make your character or just slightly change the default Kirito look, you will have constant jarring transitions between character models whenever a dialogue or cutscene is started. Now, you will get used to this happening, and it's not the biggest of deals, but after 6 games we're still in this limbo state where we are offered freedom to create our own characters, but when it comes to visually implement that character into the story, world, or just its presentation, it still feels so constricted that it's not really freedom of creating our own character. It's a weird returning struggle the series has, and even though a lot of fans have spoken out about it very often, this struggle is still not resolved. And speaking of struggles, let's talk about the combat. Sword Art Online Last Recollection has a more simplified version of the combat system that was present in Alicization Lycoris. It's very straightforward and bland action-adventure combat. The simplifications boil down to removing convoluted elements that were present in the previous game, which is great. However, it also doubled down on the tank and spank combat design that the previous game had as well. In early game, combat feels okay and is fast enough that it doesn't get mundane or in the way of your experience. Again, some aspects are smoothened when compared to the previous installment. The UI is a lot better in my opinion. Many useless mechanics like the tactical mode and such are removed, and the usage of certain mechanics are much more simplified. Early stage of combat is usually my time where I pick the weapon I want to use for the entire playthrough, and of course to design my character in the way I want him/her to be. But soon after this early stage, the combat will turn very, and I do mean very, sour. The time you spend per encounter starts to increase rapidly as enemies will gain huge amounts of HP after the first few chapters. And even when you invest a decent amount of time in leveling, gearing up and tactical setup, it barely seemed to matter. The time to take down a single monster, even the easier ones, barely decreased. Party members unfortunately don't make a difference here as well, as they are very slow in participating in battle. And when they do, and an enemy gets into a weakened state for example, they just straight up stop attacking. Which is just annoying, as it means the encounter will just take even longer than necessary. You can command party members to heal, do certain moves and such, which sometimes helps, but it didn't make things go faster. Issuing these commands usually meant one thing, that the visual presentation of the combat slightly changed for a moment, like with the group special attacks. When ordered, all characters move in to attack, which is a cool moment, deals decent amount of damage and even gains you affinity. But it will be the same long animation every single time, and after seeing it a couple of times per encounter, things will start to feel even more sluggish. Another attempt to divvy up the combat is via the dodge, parry and block system. If one of those is timed properly, you will get this slow motion state. You get to deal some extra damage while also charging the group meter for new commands or group attacks. This dodge, parry and block system has been used before in previous installments, and I think it's a good idea to divvy up the combat. It's only unfortunate that this combat system is too slow and refuses you to allow to do quick course corrections, making pulling off a perfect dodge, parry or block feel more like a mix of luck and an accident than an active choice. Though even pulling these off, be it by accident or by luck, doesn't really matter, as actively indulging in this combat system is not really required. In fact, most of what you do during the combat system is pressing one button without thinking until the encounter is over. Most attacks that are thrown at you can be tanked and healed afterwards. And if you or your party member faints, they will automatically recover after a couple of seconds to a minute or so. Now, normal encounters are manageable, but boss battles are a nightmare. Because of the lack of active input, the bland and sluggish feeling was even more noticeable in these encounters, making them feel more like time sinks than anything else, as they easily took 10 to 15 minutes of you just pressing the same button, waiting till it's over. And what is worse is that the game easily throws multiple of these encounters at you in succession. Those truly were the moments where determination is required to just keep playing. In these moments, I would describe this combat system as just a cookie clicker, but one that, while focused on numbers and having a flashy, nice presentation, felt very unrewarding and just boring. And it will remain like this for over 5 to 10 to 20, 30 hours of your playthrough. It's almost the same as the story itself. The combat system starts off alright with quite decent ideas and a little bit promising, but as you progress it slowly becomes a very watered down combat system of what you knew before. It's unfortunately some steps backwards compared to the rest of the series, which is a shame, because on other fronts, Last Recollection made some good steps forward. Alicization Lycoris had an open world design where someone sneezed over the map, filling it with bits and pieces of busy work here and there, but ultimately kept it completely empty. This made the world feel very forgettable, and thankfully Last Recollection did not go down the same path. Instead, it went with small linear designs for its levels, with some busy work here and there. While it does decrease the amount of playable space and limits exploration, it did make the world feel quite big, because we got to explore many different regions of the Dark Territory, which was precisely what I was looking forward to. Now, no, we did not get to explore the Dark Territory that well, and many places do look very similar to one another. But the grim darkness feeling you would expect from a place called the Dark Territory was present, and it did set the tone quite nicely. And even though many locations looked alike, every place had a point of interest that made the location itself cooler or give it some story to it, and made certain locations even very memorable. But again, the story doesn't allow a very in-depth exploration of these places, even though there's enough room to do so. So yeah, good steps forward, yet potential of a nice idea wasted. Yet that brings us back to what Sword Art Online always does and always has. Decent to good ideas with a lot of potential, but with the tendency to not fully explore them or to just self-sabotage them, be it by writing, game mechanics, or just complete systems. However, there is usually one or two things that shine through all this, a redeemable factor that somehow makes it worth playing Sword Art Online games. And in Last Recollection, it was definitely the setting, initial story premise that played off greatly on the foundation laid by Alicization Lycoris, the ending itself that coined some interesting resolves, and of course, Dorothy. You could argue that those are just breadcrumbs compared to the larger picture, which I would say is fair, yet those breadcrumbs show the incredible potential hiding very deeply in these games. Recommending these games, however, is very tough. Even the good Sword Art Online games are somewhat of a hard sell. And Last Recollection is in particular tough to recommend, mainly because it's a direct sequel to Alicization Lycoris, but it also just feels like a DLC or an expansion to the game instead of a whole new one. I would say that in terms of story, Last Recollection is slightly better than Alicization Lycoris, but when it comes to gameplay, it's one of the worst in the series. If you are a diehard fan of Sword Art Online and or played Alicization Lycoris, I would recommend giving Last Recollection a chance if you haven't already. Though be sure to buy it on discount, cause full price it's definitely not worth it. But if you're someone new and looking to get into Sword Art Online games, I would not recommend starting here. Go with Hollow Realization if you want a decent Sword Art Online story, or go with Fatal Bullet if you want a really nice gameplay experience in a Sword Art Online world. I would not recommend playing Alicization Lycoris solely just to play Last Recollection, as despite its good ideas, its great potential of Dorothy and its interesting ending, it's just not worth the struggle to get there.